Okie dokie.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So I got brother Monty here of the YouTube channel Yaksa Manji, or Manji is his YouTube channel, and I think your handle is Mustadi Ibn Adam, something like that.
Yeah, I had the title Yaksha Manji for a while, but I kind of didn't want to use that anymore because it's associated with some kind of silly things, Hinduism and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, I'm doing quite well out here. How about you?
I'm good, man. Praise God. I just wanted to bring this man on to my channel to kind of go forward with what I've been doing before, what I did with Brother Tristan, which is I want people to give their testimony of how they came to the Quran alone. And I don't know too much about this man's past, but I'm sure he has a very interesting testimony just from the little bit of time I've shared with him. There's a lot of interesting stories to share. And I guess I'll leave a link for his channel in the description. And I suppose the main purpose of his channel is he kind of comments on what's going on in this Quran alone space. So our group, right? Quran alone, history, revisionism, flat earth, conspiracy thinking, that kind of thing. He kind of reflects on that whole community. And I found his channel to be very beneficial. I listen to it while I'm at work. So would you say I accurately represented what your channel's about?
It's flattering. Thank you. Yeah, there's several things. I've been talking a lot about the history stuff for a while. The Occulted History series is kind of how I got in the Quranic scene on YouTube, basically, because from my viewpoint of history, you can't ignore the Quran at all. And that was a problem I commented on at the beginning, was a lot of these Tartaria people just kind of don't want to look at that. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tartaria stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I know a little bit about it. But basically, Tartaria has become a catch-all term for the world empires that existed in the past, which have their history hidden from us today.
Right. So, I'm sure if people want to know more about that, they can just, check out my channel. But as far as how I got into Quran alone,
let us know your background, like how you grew up, what your family was like, whatever you're comfortable hearing.
So first of all, my name's Montana. I live in northern New Mexico. I'm 33 years old. I do lots of different things. I'm a gunsmith. I'm a carpenter. I'm a landscaper, house cleaner. Do a little bit of everything. Anyway, I guess so. Yeah, let's start at the beginning.
Yep.
So it turns out I was very blessed in my upbringing because
you were blessed. You were blessed. Sorry, you cut out there. Born into
a Christian background.
Okay.
Say that again.
You said you were blessed. You cut out there for a second.
I was very blessed in my upbringing. I was born into what you would call a Christian background, but what that really meant was my mother and father, when I was very young, they basically introduced me to the idea of, praying. And it was a very basic system. It was just like at night, kneel on your bed and you thank God for everything and you pray for people that you're thinking about. I wasn't really introduced to Christianity until later, because what happened was, like I said, when I was younger, my parents are just like, hey, God, I knew God existed, right? I was just a child, and we just had a very basic system, and it wasn't like Christianity per se, but basically I was basically given Milat Ibrahim from the get-go, just basic monotheism, basic.
You didn't hear
just
a lot
praying to God.
You didn't hear a lot of this Jesus stuff growing up. It was just God mentioned in your house.
Well, when I was at first, so this is my introduction into religion in general. Is my parents gave me the most basic of a religion, which is just like, hey, let's pray to God. It's nighttime, let's say what we're thankful for, and let's pray for whoever we're thinking about. Let's pray for grandma or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, so that was what I was raised with. When I was about 4 years old, my parents went through a divorce, and that saw me spending lots and lots of time with my grandparents while they figured everything out. I hope all this noise out here isn't too much for you.
No.
Can you hear me okay over everything?
Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay, they're out here like tearing up the road and everything. But so when I spent time, both of my grandparents are how I got. So it was like, right, I had this monotheism. I didn't even heard of Jesus. I literally never heard of Jesus. I had no idea about anything about a crucifixion. I just prayed to God when I'm talking little. And then when I grew up a little bit, and I'm spending lots of time at my grandparents, on one side of my family, my dad's side, they're country people that live in just, the country, and they're Protestants. So my grandmother on my dad's side, she was the one that first gave me a Bible. And on the other side, my mom's side, they're like very, very hardline Catholics. So immediately I got exposed to, church and then mass. And, on one hand, it's like, first of all, I've always been a little bit closer with my dad's side of the family. But also I just realized really quickly, Catholicism is not for me, right? But yeah, to give a little bit of background, I guess it's like, have you ever seen King of the Hill?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Well, I'm sure your viewers, it's very popular. But practically, I grew up in, King of the Hill is based off of... Hi.
I love your sign, by the way.
Thanks. King of the Hill is based off of the exact place where I grew up. So people watching will know kind of what it was like for me in my upbringing, just based off of that. But I was exposed to going to church in a Protestant setting. I was exposed to going to church in a, mass rather. And, I started reading the Bible when I was a kid, pretty young. And I remember thinking man, this is not a book for kids. that was what I thought.
You get into certain... I get it, the world is cruel and mean, but you get into certain books like the Book of Judges, and it's more violent than Game of Thrones. It's just vicious. You have, God forbid, God commanding to collect hundreds of golden hemorrhoids, and there's certain parts of the Bible that's pornography, explicitly talking about the sexual relations that a woman has with her husband. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's not a book for kids, dude, at all. So that was my... So, right. I was born into... I basically, when I say I got blessed, because, my parents, to their credit, they did not indoctrinate me with anything weird, actually. It was my grandparents that exposed me to that. It was because they weren't even trying to indoctrinate me, really. They just... I went to church. I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't for me, but I wasn't too proud to go. You know what I mean? I loved going to church with my grandparents. It was a fun experience, but I learned a lot. And I really got super weirded out by Catholic Church, just because it was so large, and just the imagery was so huge. They have these gigantic crucifixes that are huge, with a realistic Jesus on it, and he's all bloody.
Yeah, it's like coming to something from a different era. When I first walked into a Catholic church years ago just to see it, it's like you're walking into a different time, a different place. I remember that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was strange to me as a kid. Going to the other church was a little bit... It was... So, I didn't do the Catholic thing as much. It was several times I went and I'm okay, I kind of get what this is about. But going to Protestant church, I did that a lot more and studied the actual Bible a lot more. There's my brother. Anyway, so when I started reading the Bible and stuff, again, I was this isn't really for me, but I'm going to keep reading it. I kept reading it, and I went to church, and I was always, just right from the get-go, as soon as I was exposed to this idea of Jesus and the crucifixion, and then also my parents did not instill in me any kind of notion of original sin when I was a child, because it makes sense. It's how are you going to tell a child, how are you going to tell a 4-year-old that they're going to hell, basically?
For
right?
an audience who's not familiar with the doctrine of original sin and certain forms of Christianity, it's essentially the idea that because Adam sinned when he ate of the fruit in the garden, the forbidden fruit, that we now, being Adam's progeny, bear the legacy of that sin ourselves. So because he was guilty, we inherited that guilt, and in order to free us from this, we need obviously the blood atonement of Jesus Christ, etc.
But yeah, so as soon as I was introduced to that concept, I was like, a little disgusted, and just in this whole thing about whatever. Anyway, I don't need to tell people about Christianity because it's pretty obvious what Christianity's deal is. My journey, basically. Okay, so that's the very early years.
Okay.
Later on, I would. So this is what I say in my videos, like it's the default. I'm a white dude in Texas, right? It's like I believe in God. Before I even knew about Jesus or anything, it was like I'm a Christian, right? But that's what you would tell people because that's what you think it is. So
right.
Later on, I grew up a little, and I've always been into art. I've always drawn a lot. I've always been into fantasy stuff, right? So like I was really into Star Wars when I was a kid. And another thing, so some of the things that got me into where I am now are just my experiences with my interactions with, I would say, like the unseen, right?
Okay.
One of the first things that ever happened, I mean, there's a lot of things, it's hard to think of them all, but one of the first things that happened was in September of 2001, there was something that happened that shaped the world. And I remember exactly where I was at that moment. I was sitting...
Were you 12?
I was in school.
12, 11 years old?
Yeah, September 11th, 2001. I was at school, and I was sitting in the gymnasium. And there was... the school that I went to was pretty big. I mean, in size, not in, it was, the gymnasium is pretty big. So I'm sitting there, and there's like a point where you're waiting. You're like, it was the end of a class or something. But I just, I thought of it because I bring up Star Wars because I'm like, I had this, it was like, I just felt like, what the fuck? I'm looking over here. I'm like, what is going on? I just had this sense, like something awful just happened.
And you didn't hear of the.
Not till I got home.
Okay.
Not till I got home. I had this sense. They didn't tell us anything at school. I get on the bus to go home, and then I hear about it, and I'm like, whoa, that's weird. It was weird because I'm like, I have this sense, like something awful just happened. It was like there's a disturbance in the force, or whatever. So, go home and got it. The first thing, now, when I was here, you gotta.
I need to cut you off.
When I was younger,
you're breaking up really badly. You're roboting.
The other day. What was your?
Oh
man. Okay, hold on. I have an idea.
Yeah.
Okay, I know where to go. Can you hear me any better right now?
Now you're coming in good. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna walk to another place where there's strong Wi-Fi.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's just like I said. The building I'm in is an adobe castle. If you can see right there, it's a huge. That it's not very friendly to radio waves.
Right.
Yeah, take a look. This is where I live. Some people say it looks like Afghanistan. I don't know. Never been. Anyway, okay.
Wait, let me try. Let me try.
Is this working?
Try turning off the display, and then we'll see if the sound comes in better.
Hear me right now? I'm at the spot. I'm at the spot right now. Let's see if it works. I just gotta make sure I'm on their Wi-Fi. You can cut this out if you need to. Okay, I turned the Wi-Fi off. That's why. I didn't even realize.
Okay.
All right, 1 second, Waleed. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No worries.
Hola. Come on. This should be good now. Let's see. Actually, up here is even better.
Now I'm hearing you.
Okay. Okay, I should be good now because I'm on Wi-Fi. Let me see. I don't know how to get back to the video call. Here we go. Okay. Is this working?
Yep.
Okay, so
Wait. Yeah. Now your video is on. I can see you.
yeah. Okay, so okay. So you brought up Full Metal Alchemist. When I was younger, I saw Full Metal Alchemist, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It was so cool to me. I don't know why. It was the yantras. It was those Seals of Solomon things, right?
And for those who don't know, Full Metal Alchemist is an anime, a very interesting anime.
And so this got me into, let's just say this got me into Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, stuff like that. I mean, I was pretty young. So I started studying this stuff because the show is one thing, but it got me into studying actual alchemy. So I started studying alchemy.
Was this after the 9/11 thing?
Oh yeah, this is like several years later. Between this time and then, I just kind of was a kid. Nothing really of note. But so anyway, I start watching the show Full Metal Alchemist. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I start studying. I already like write my own alphabets and stuff like that. I would do these yantras on my floor. I had tile in my room. But the thing is I didn't know what I was doing, right? I thought this stuff was really cool looking. I thought these yantras, that's what I think they're called, the Seals of Solomon things, the big circles with the pentagrams and stuff.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought they were really cool looking, and I used to design them all the time. So basically, this eventually got me mixed up with ceremonial magic, right?
Okay.
So imagine, right? I'm like, I don't know, like 14, doing ceremonial magic, and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. By the way, sorry, try not to cuss, but I don't know what I'm doing. And what I knew was, right, when you look at these things, this is a red pill right here. Every one of these arrays or whatever, they have Hebrew writing all over it, right? Okay. And I've mentioned this in a video before, but what happened to me was, Waleed, I pretty much accidentally came into contact with a jinn, basically, when I was a kid.
While doing your magical ceremonies.
I didn't have any reason to think that this was going to happen, by the way, because what you do when you make these arrays, I think the one that I did was, it's like, you have several circles, and then there's a ring of text on the outside, and then you have, like a big triangle with a smaller Star of David on the inside, and it's got names of God in Hebrew written all over it. Okay. But the Hebrew names of God, okay? Now, this somehow, it like, okay, and you were asking me about the jinns and like when people can't normally see jinns, right?
Yeah.
What I believe I did was, through my foolishness, I sort of tore a hole into the jinn world,
the veil
in my room. There's a veil. And when I say it's a veil, like, think about it. A veil is not very thick. It just kind of blocks one, it actually only blocks one side. They can see us, right? So what happened was I had an encounter with a jinn, and this jinn, I don't want to go into it too much, but let me just tell you, it scared me like you wouldn't believe. This thing kind of almost, what it feels like when you're doing this ceremonial magic, you're like, oh, it's like you're putting this energy like forward, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a thing, it's like there's a thing there ready to eat it. That's what it feels like. You have this energy coming out of your heart and your soul, and then all of a sudden there's like this thing there, and it's trying to eat it. So having this experience,
how old were you at the time? How old were you at that?
I was probably like 14. Yeah, maybe younger. It's hard to remember exactly. I remember the experience, and I remember, like, I was definitely in the later part of middle school.
Okay,
at
you
this
weren't
time.
An adult though. Okay, you were still a young man, kid almost.
Yeah. So anyway, I had spent all this time studying all this stuff. People would give me these books, The Golden Dawn, all this stuff, right? So And I didn't realize how satanic this stuff was. I had no idea, because you can't tell, because it's actually all this like, oh, these are names of God. These are names of the angels. Why is it that those names of God supposedly have demons showing up in my room? So that's obviously
that's really what taught you that this magic alchemy stuff was all satanic, because a lot of these people, they try to make you think, oh, they're workers of light and light magic and good spirit guides. I'm kind of curious. So that's really what brought you to the realization this is darkness, not light.
Yeah. As you're well aware, there are many people that say Lucifer is the light. He's the being of light. Light is there's more to God than light. You know what I'm saying? So, and light, you know what I mean? Like if I burn your house down, there's going to be light. Yeah. Light is something people obsess over, like numbers, So anyway, I have this experience. I encountered a jinn pretty much. And what's crazy is that's a long story on its own. Basically, I realized something is wrong with that. I should stop doing that. I stopped. I cut it. I said no more. Okay. And then for the rest of my, formative years, I studied everything. First of all, I've been to every kind of church you can imagine. My mom joined a cult that I had to be in for a little while. It's called the 12 Tribes. Have you heard of that?
No.
They're also called the Yellow Deli people. It's a hilarious story, but they're basically Messianic Jews. That's the best way I can describe them.
I know all about that.
Yeah. So, but they're kind of like Amish too. They set up their own. In a way, you have to give them some credit, because on one hand, they're kind of cool because they farm their own stuff and whatever. They get in trouble for child labor, but I've seen the child labor. The child labor is literally like, all right, guys, will you help us put these stickers on these, things of salve? I did that. You know what I mean?
Good.
So anyway, I've been to the Rock. I brought up King of the Hill for your viewers. Some people will remember that there's a episode where Bobby joins this after school program, and it's like a rock and roll skateboard church, and he's all like, praise him, woo! I've been to churches like that. I've been to I went through Buddhism. I went through cheap Western Buddhism for people who don't know Buddhism. Basically, I went through that. I went through Christian Buddhism. I went through Tantric Tibetan Buddhism. I went through every flavor of Hinduism you can imagine. I was a Shaivite. I was a Vaishnava. I was a Advaita Vedanta. I was a Hanuman Bhakt. There's a temple here in town that, they facilitate that kind of stuff. But basically, I went through all this stuff. I studied Zoroastrianism, Gnosticism, and very seriously, in it all, everything that I had been involved in, everything was missing something,
Yeah, you're seeking.
I was seeking hard, man. I was seeking so hard. So practically what happened was, throughout my high school years, okay, so another little bit about me is when I was younger, I got through school by just smoking my tests. I never did homework. I refused to. I was like, I'm not taking school home with me. But it was enough for me to get through school to just do really good on my tests. After I got into middle school, it was like, this isn't really working. By the time I got to high school, it did not work anymore. So practically what I did was, I dropped out in 9th grade and I went right to college. I failed 9th grade the first time. The second time, about a couple months in, I dropped out. I just went straight to community college. And that gave me a lot of time to study stuff. So
you got your youth.
My friends.
Good. You didn't let them steal all your youth with that high school card. Good.
Thank God. It wasn't just that, my friends in Texas, a lot of them were really foolish people that they really got into drugs. Probably many of them are dead or on heroin now, and it's really sad, but I didn't really want to be close with them. I just kind of isolated myself and studied a lot. So I'm going through all this stuff. I end up coming to New Mexico, blah, blah, blah. So how I really got into Quranism. I had studied everything else, or Quran alone, whatever. I'd studied everything else. I'm like, this is stupid. Like everything's missing something. And I kind of went all the way back around to where I was when I was a kid, where it's like, I know there's a God. I don't have to come. Like, I know there's a God. So the whole time, it's like, even when you're a Hindu, like Hinduism allows for monotheism, believe it or not,
that,
because
even when I talk to Hindus, they understand, a lot of them deep down, that there's only one God. Just to give you a quick kind of story.
Canon.
Like I was talking to, there was a Hindu guy at my workplace, and I clean in a college, and in this college they do every Friday Hindu festivals, and you can hear them praising Ram.
Every Friday, huh?
Every Friday they do it there, and all the Indian students, they all gather there to check out the Hindu festival. A guy asked me for directions to that place, and I didn't want to lead him there, but at the same time, I wanted to be kind and help him. So while I was walking there, I was asking him, like, oh, what do you guys do there? What is this? Is this Hinduism? He said, yeah. And then I said, what do you guys, I don't know how the conversation got to it, but I asked him, like, do you guys have statues in there? And he said, yeah. And I said, what are they for? And he said, these are our gods. And then I told him, but how can you make an image of God? God is beyond our imagination. He's one God. And he was like nodding and understanding that. They all understand this deep down.
They actually believe, you know, the thing is, right, my personal, it's not even personal, really, like, to me, like, what corrupts religions and why things are the way they are is just overcomplicating things. Hindus actually believe that, practically, they actually believe there's one God and that he cannot be perceived. The thing, it's like this. What I think is they practically took stories that they had in their collective memory about the prophets, and then they deified these prophets, and then a lot of time went by.
That's exactly what happened. So,
and even the statues, it's like, it's a Morti, it's like, it's a symbol. They have all, it's, you know, whatever. But my point is, I used to, there's an ashram here, and it's a cool place, sort of, but, you know, I used to do, Hinduism, especially, I have to caution, I know that probably there's not a lot of people watching your channel that are Hindus, but, like, you know, I really have to caution people about Shaivism, like, or in other words, worshiping Shiva in particular. It will drive you insane. That's what I learned by being a Hindu, is that it will fucking drive you insane. You will lose your mind. Maybe within a context of, like, I grew up in this and whatever, it's different. But for me in the West, Hinduism drives people nuts.
What do you mean by that? In what way?
Okay, so think about this, right? We are in a Christian society here in America, where I live, right? At least I'm sure it's similar up there. But what happens is you get these kids that are raised Christian. This kind of happened to me, but it didn't really. But what happens is that our culture makes psychedelics really accessible. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, mushrooms are practically legal in New Mexico, where I live. So what happens is these kids will take psychedelics, and then they have this whole trip about, it's this matrix thing. They have this like program, like, really, it's this a jinn conspiracy like you wouldn't believe, where it comes to convincing people. Practically, first what happens is you become convinced that you're Jesus or something, and then it's called Jerusalem syndrome, and it happens where I live a lot. It's weird, but the people, basically, first you become convinced that you're Jesus in an archetypal sense, and then later you're like, I'm God. Like, basically they trick you into thinking that you are God, because Hinduism basically has this pretext that, like, God is everything, right? Not that God created it. God created everything, but it's like, no, God is everything. God is this coffee cup. God is this coffee. God's the toilet paper that you use when, you know, it's like all this ridiculous stuff. Yeah. Anyway, that's why it drives people crazy. But back to my story, I guess. Like, I went through all this stuff. I'm studying everything. And I actually learning that everything is lacking. Everything I could think of was missing something. I actually had the idea to basically, astaghfirullah, I had the idea to create my own religion, more or less. And it wasn't that far off from Milat Ibrahim to begin with, but
something which was
it
natural,
was, you know,
something which felt natural.
Yeah. It was just a whole, like, you know, religion and culture. There's a lot to talk about there because, you know, as you can see with Sunnism and Hinduism, culture, it becomes intertwined in religion in an inseparable way. And so, for example, if you have a let's say a culture of, I don't know, you have a culture of like a sexual culture, very sexual culture, you get a religion, it's going to make its way into that religion, sort of, right?
Right, it gets localized.
Yeah. Anyway, what happened was I started looking into this stuff, and I had a Muslim friend online. So I had looked at everything, but I hadn't really investigated the Quran. That was the one thing. I was familiar with Islamic culture and stuff, but I didn't really ever read the Quran. I had picked one up and looked at it. And of course, looking at it through the biblical lens, you're like, oh, this is just like the Bible, but like out of order, and the stories are wrong, right?
Yeah.
That's how they trick you. So I basically, at some point, I started talking to these people. I was serious. I had a whole thing. I had like written out all this stuff, whatever. And I was talking to my buddy, and he's like, you know what, dude, you should just, he's a Sunni guy. He's a cool guy, but you know, he's like, you know what, Islam is not lacking that much. Like, you should just check it out. And I'm like, okay, I mean, like, I've done everything else. Like, let's just check it out, right? And what I did was I got on my phone and I started reading the Quran just on my phone. And it was like, you know, many people probably have this experience where it's like, whoa, this is so familiar to me.
How old were you at this time when you were reading the Quran?
This is about 4 years ago.
Okay.
So I would have been 29. 29. I think, yeah. Which I'm trying to think. That puts it right before the meme cough. That whole thing that happened that is still unfortunately dragging on. Yeah. Just clawing its way. So just before all this, right, I start reading the Quran, and I'm like, man, this is the best thing. This is what I've been looking for this whole time. This is like, it was just like quenching, right? It's like, you know, like you're seeking, you're thirsty, right? And it's like, here's the best water you could ever imagine. Oh my God, I need it. So I'm reading this, I'm taking it in, I'm really absorbing it. I'm really like, it just, the Quran, like, I've read all this other stuff, dude. I read the Bhagavad Gita and all these books, and they're all worthless. Like, none of them I even care to remember. Like, I literally just expunge them out of my memory because it's just like, there's nothing useful here, right? But the Quran is like, it was like, immediately I knew, my fitra, I immediately recognized this is like nothing else in the world. Like, nothing else.
It was like pouring the truth right into you in the most distilled manner.
Exactly. Just purity, like, wow. And it helped that what I did was I looked for the just most basic translation I could find. The one that I used in English for the first time is a website called clearquran.com. Yep. But it is not, I didn't know this, it's not the same as the Clear Quran book that you get, because I ordered the book and I was like, this is different. They do have it on a book. It's Talal Itani. Anyway, it was a very straightforward translation that has no brackets. There's not a whole bunch of insertions of like, oh prophet, oh prophet, oh prophet, oh prophet, when it's not there. Yeah. It's trying to be a one-to-one. It's a one-to-one ratio of words, but as you know, there are many errors, and there's in fact a conspiracy when it comes to translating the Quran into English, or probably anything, right? But it helped that was what I was introduced to the Quran with, because it was like, there's no historical context being forced on me. There was no like extra stuff. It was just like the straightforward in English, more or less, message. And what stood out to me the most was this, one of the first things I should say is just this whole idea that like, oh yeah, Jesus, he wasn't killed. No way. No way. And I'm like, whoa, I knew it, because one of the things I had gotten into, it was already in Hinduism. There's a sect of, I guess you could call it like yogic Christianity, where they do not deify Jesus, but it's like they don't believe in the crucifixion. I can't remember what it's even called, but basically there's these people, and it's all gate kept too. They have this whole thing where like, oh, Jesus is buried in Kashmir and all this stuff, which is not true. Jesus is not buried in Kashmir. I'll say that right now.
Yeah,
but
I think I told you, I mentioned that to you in our private conversation, that there's this tradition that he went down to Kashmir or something like that.
Yeah, I used to follow that tradition once upon a time, very seriously, and practically what it is like that warmed me up to this idea already. In other words, I already had convinced myself, regardless, before I reverted to my kind of just basic belief in God, I'd already convinced myself that the crucifixion was a lie.
Even before
just on my own. So when I saw that this book said this, I was like, okay, you got my attention, and I'm reading it and it's like, oh yeah, okay. And then I did realize right away, I'm like, this history obviously is different. There's no way that like this is such a pivotal thing. And you think about the influence of Christianity, it's like, every time I would go to church, that's like, I would go to these mass, Christmas events, and it's like all they talked about. It was one of the last things, and it was my step grandparents that I went to this with. It was one of the last times I went to a church like this. All they talk about is how Jesus died. They even said, and it's like, okay, this isn't even about.
Our secular history is really a Christian history.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So this is okay. So anyway, right? I'm like, oh wow, because like I said, they were talking about like, oh, they're like, yeah, it's important that Jesus was born today, but really, it's important that Jesus was born because if Jesus wasn't born, then he couldn't die. Whoa! I'm like, man, this is okay. So I'm reading the Quran. I'm working my way through it. It took me a year, one whole year, to read the Quran. And before I had finished, I had already decided. There was a point. I used to be vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for nearly 15 years.
Wow.
And it was very difficult because when you're a vegetarian, to work out, you basically have to work out twice as much just to keep any muscle mass at all. So it was hard, but
you were wasting away.
It's all, hey, it was, you know what? Some people can't do it at all. I managed, and it was all for a purpose. It was all part of God's plan, because you know what? The fact is this: I would not have met my wife. She was vegetarian her entire life. We eat meat now. Don't worry about it. But anyway,
does she come from a Christian background or?
No, you know what? Her parents are like hippies.
Oh yeah.
Her dad. We'll talk about that sometime. But basically, she was raised in paganism practically, and it was basically up to me to get her out of that. And it was all, man, God is so good. That's all I can say. God is so good. Like,
of course,
God is so good. So anyway, that's a whole other story. But practically, what it's linked, because during this time, this is when I met my wife. It's just around that time, just a little before, and I was already like, well, because she was young. My wife, I'm not going to lie to you, my wife is 10 years younger than me. And, and that's just how it is. Like, but anyway, say what?
No shame in the game.
Hey, you know what? I think that's part of the natural order, actually. That's a whole other topic. But anyway, so I'm living in a van, at this time. There was a whole bunch of stuff I went through. I had a house. It's a long story. I got my mom was dealing with her own gens, and she made life extremely difficult for me. And pretty much for one reason or another decided that she really wanted to see me fail. So in spite of that, I had to get my own life together and pull through. Practically, I had to pull through homelessness for something like 4 years. And I've done this before. I've lived out of my car before. In fact, right where I'm filming right here, this used to be my front porch. And it's a beautiful place, as you can see. This place we live is pretty nice. But anyway, I'm living in a van when I met my wife. And this whole thing, her mom was trying to practically groom her into being an alcoholic at the age of 17. And she really needed to get away from her housing situation. So I just was like, dude, I don't care. You live with me in my van if you want. But, it was all good. But anyway, Quran. So I start reading the Quran. I'm digesting it. On my 30th birthday, I decided, okay, this is it. I don't need to be a vegetarian anymore. I don't need to pretend I'm something else. I'm just a Muslim now. I stopped drinking. I started eating meat. And, that was 3 years ago. So that was when it was concrete. That was kind of my declaration of this is what I'm doing now, right? It was 3 years ago. So since then, I've been reading the Quran. I'm already aware of this idea that there's a different history here. It's just very strange.
Yeah.
And I'm playing music. I'm playing metal. I play metal with some kids, and one of these kids, he mentioned the mud flood. And I was like, man, I keep hearing this term. And then Tartaria. He mentioned mud flood, Tartaria. And I'm like, man, I just keep hearing this, but I don't even know what this is. Because the only other person that I had known that ever mentioned the word Tartaria to me, he was kind of a schizo, kind of a tweaker, and I was like, okay, but anyway, he mentioned mud flood to me. I was like, I'm just going to look this up. Like I said, I actually thought it had something to do with a racist thing, something about a flood of brown people or something like that. So I looked it up, and the first thing I find is this David Ewing Jr. character. And I know I've mentioned him to you before.
Yeah.
But this guy, basically, what he has done is he showed up out of nowhere, and he has all this information, and it's good information, but what he's done.
Kind of explain to my audience. So if you read the Quran, it's very clear that the history that God is talking about is very different to the history we're given. And that is conspicuous, to say the least. All the most greatest influential figures in history, Alexander the Great, Attila the Hun, who's the other guy, Genghis Khan, none of these people are mentioned in the Quran ever. All the most influential, Plato, Socrates, none of them. It's God is operating on the assumption that the prophets are the most influential men to ever exist. And this David Ewing Jr. guy, he's going on with that and pushing a kind of historic revisionism.
So what you just said there, right? These characters, we have tons of these characters, and many of them, he's pointing out Fomenko's work, which is you can actually just look and see they copied history, they just kind of copied everything. So whoever the real Genghis Khan was, whoever the real Attila the Hun was, whoever the real King Arthur was, whoever the real Ertugrul was, they're probably all the same person, and I will probably bet that it is somebody that is in the Quran. But which one are you going to go off of, right? It's are you going to take this Zulkarnain, right? Which one are you going to go off of? Are you going to go off the secular history? People, by the way, just to bring up Genghis Khan, there is a whole movement right now where people are completely questioning Mongolian history. They're just did this even happen? Because they're going to Mongolia and there is no evidence at all. But what do we have? We have collective memory. So this is the stuff that David Ewing Jr. talks about. It's just to give a summary. He brings up Anatoly Fomenko a lot. And Anatoly Fomenko is a Russian guy who basically points out that the history seems to be a fake because they use computers to try to what happened was they were going around looking for evidence of biblical events, and what they were finding was that some of these things that are described.
Where were they looking, in the Middle East?
They just everywhere. They were comparing, because that whole thing about looking in the Middle East, that already has been done. This guy, he's a Russian nationalist. So he actually, they want to revise history to a more Eurocentric type of thing, because what Anatoly Fomenko did point out is that the events of the Bible appear to be it's way more likely that the events of the Bible have something to do with Europe and the Crusades and Inquisitions and all this stuff, right? There's evidence for that. For example, probably it's, in the Bible, when they talk about Jerusalem, probably most of the time they're talking about Istanbul. That's a whole other thing. But I can't confirm that. I don't want to endorse those theories because I cannot confirm that. Yeah,
just to kind of give my audience a little perspective, the Bible it's got a lot of issues with it. It's serious problems. And we even suspect certain brothers in the faith, including myself and Brother Monty right here, and other people as well, that at least the quote-unquote oldest manuscripts we have today of the Bible were actually written after the Quran to counteract and circumvent around the Quranic message. Because Christians, they'll push this idea that the Bible came first, it has more authority, but I suspect that maybe this stuff was written after the Quran. I know it might blow your mind, but
that is what got me into David Ewing Jr. basically, because this guy, I just looked up a video. He's like, oh yeah, the mud floods and everything, but the Quran has a different history. Yes, the Quran says this and that, and I'm like, so I'm already looking at this and I'm already reading the Quran, and it's like, I'm just like, what is this idea of Tartaria anyway? Like, what is this? And then his guy is like, well, it has something to do with the Quran. I'm like, really? Because I didn't know this had anything to do with the Quran. But he's one of the only people saying that. But what happened was David Ewing Jr. and like, I'll tell your audience the same way I've told my audience, this research that he has put forward, it's worth looking into, because the thing is, they know very well that people are beginning to question history very, very seriously.
Just like the shape.
Now that the internet is just accessible to practically everybody, there is this Hadith narrative, for example, it's completely fallen apart.
Yep.
And they want to get ahead of that. So they have agents ready and waiting to give you the answers and put it in a nice little package that's easy for you to digest.
Yeah.
So anyway, David does this. He is the one who showed me the evidence. So again, as I had mentioned to you before, I just looked this video up. I'm like, whoa, okay, let's see what else he has to say. I watched all of his videos that existed at that time, just a couple years ago. I watched every video, and then I added him on Facebook. Next thing I know, he's calling me. He wants to do interviews with me and stuff, and he's telling me all the same stuff, whatever. Now, when I started making my videos, the first video that I did with the title Occulted History, this is right after this guy called me. Or no. He saw that video. Somehow he saw that video. That's when he decided to call me, right? Or I sent it to him or something, but he saw my video. He's like, oh yeah, okay, blah, blah, blah. So, and in the video, I was like, maybe I'll get an interview with this guy. He called me and we start talking, blah, blah, blah. I recorded these interviews. He's the one that pointed out to me the evidence, like for sure, that the Bible is no way older than the Quran. Like, it's impossible. And the fact that the Bible comes from Egypt, Babylon, right? Like, I'll just make a quick summation of like what David Ewing Jr. is going to tell you. Number one, Babylon and Egypt was the same. There was an interchangeable term back in the day. So the Bible comes from Babel, and there's this whole thing, like basically what he wants to convince you is that Islam comes from Europe, when really there's a ton of evidence that there was Islam in Europe. Like, Islam was the predominant force of Europe. That does not mean that that's where it came from, but the fact that there was
worldwide.
Yeah, the fact that there was an Islamic history in Europe that has been practically erased, and it's not just Europe. The deeper you dig, it's everywhere. It is everywhere. Now,
basically,
looking into this,
kind of tell my audience. So right now we're given a Christian perspective in our world history. Christianity seems like the most influential religion, the most powerful religion. It hasn't always been that way. There has been. It's not Quranic Millat Ibrahim, but there has been a religion that claims to believe in the Quran that had worldwide power in the same way Christianity does today. But this is being hidden from us. Think of like the way Brother describes it, Brother Monty, is he says like a Quranic Catholicism, Sunni-esque, a Sunni world order.
That's what it looks like. So again, I cannot prove this, but the evidence and you know what, a lot of it again was just talking to David, because I'm just going to tell your audience again, hey, check out his research, check out his earlier videos, especially, are really good. But he didn't come up with this knowledge. He knows that there are things that he's dropped that other people haven't figured out yet. But what he wants to do is convince you, I'm trustworthy, I'm a sincere advisor. Yeah, right. Like he wants to convince you that he's trustworthy, and ultimately, actually, this guy is going to tell you the Quran is fake. But anyway, this guy, what he's pointing at is all these things in history, right? Like, okay, everybody, there's a lot of this stuff has to do with collective memory. Everybody remembers a book from God. Everybody. Even native tribes and stuff, even people in places that have barely been touched by history.
Tibet.
Everybody remembers
the remote regions,
a holy book.
They have it as well, the remote regions of Tibet.
Everybody remembers Jesus. I told you, I'm in northern New Mexico. These people who have this, the oldest continually inhabited structure in North America. You know, they can't decide how old it is. It's at least 700 or 800 years old. It could be 3,000 years old. We don't know, because it's made of mud. So they remember Jesus coming here, right? Like, that's their story. They say that Jesus came here and like talked to them and told them something. You know what it was? See, they're not really vocal about this. I only know this because I have very good friends that are part of that tribe. But anyway,
you get the Mormons. The Mormons, they'll say that Jesus came to the Americas and stuff like that, which might be a very garbled up version of the truth. Like,
of course, Mormonism is like, talk about gatekeeping.
Yeah, but the truth is, so the problem with the history we're given, and which the Sunnis and the Christians and the Jews, they all accept wholesale modern history. They try to confine the Quran and the biblical events to purely the Middle East. But the impression we get from the Quran, and what's clear if you look at world history, is that this is worldwide. Every nation, culture, and tribe has connections to these characters mentioned in the Quran. Abraham, Moses, Jesus. India, Europe, Africa, North America, Native Americans, all of us have a connection to this. It's not just only for the Middle East.
Because the tomb of Jesus in Kashmir that's fake, but the idea that you know is beneath that is that practically, basically, there were people there who were like, oh yeah, Jesus came here. We talked to him. Here's it's hadith basically, but they have hadiths about Jesus in Hinduism practically. So. And then I mentioned this, I'll throw this in there. I told you about this, but there are places in Tibet, there's all these exorbitant temples that are way up on mountains, like on the tops of like impossible cliffs. These are everywhere, by the way. I mean, they're in China, they're all over the place. But the thing is, there was another guy made a video about this, how back in the day, he didn't put it together, you know what I mean? But it's like, it's so obvious that back in the day, there was a Russian guy. I think this was in the mid 1800s that this Russian guy supposedly goes to Tibet and he's talking to all these people. I don't know. This guy might have been a Muslim or an Orthodox. It's hard to say, but he went to Tibet, and at that time, what he wrote in his book was everybody just knew, oh yeah, that temple up there that was built by King Solomon. That was Solomon came here. He like flew here with a bunch of stuff and people. And he said, okay, guys, I'm building this temple. We're going to build this place, and this is for you. And then he prays there, and then they leave. And now all those places, the same places, they say, Oh yeah, it was built by the Buddha or this, some other guy, a king, a Hindu king.
Yeah.
Anyway, this stuff is what David Ewing Jr., for better or worse, he did bring out a lot of the lies. He points out a lot of it. So one thing is he points out really concretely how Hadith is fake. He blew a hole in Hadith pretty hard.
Okay.
And if you haven't looked into that, it's worth checking out, because essentially there are people, if there was a world order that was perhaps something like Sunnism, maybe a little different than Sunnism today, but practically a Sunni world order, like think of the Ottoman Empire. Think of what people think of as the Ottoman Empire. Let's say that history is a lie, but there's something like that here in America, everywhere. And this gigantic empire had an enemy who is now the Catholics or the Vatican, right?
The Christian world.
And they were at war. Sort of. Are they really Christian?
No. Yeah.
Here's what David's pointing out. Okay, he's right about this, I think. Who were the real Christians? Because, if the crucifixion's a lie, if the divinity of Jesus is a lie, if the Trinity is a lie, we have evidence. This is what David is going to point out, and this is why his videos are worth watching. There's evidence that Christianity, as we think of it, like, this is why it's impossible that Christianity shaped the world. It didn't even exist that long ago. It literally didn't exist until the 1500s. Think about it. Because Christianity meant following Isa. Isa was a Muslim. So if you were a Christian, you were a Muslim. That's all it was. So yes, Christianity, following this character, following this man, meant Islam.
Yeah.
Right. Christianity.
One thing I want to say to my audience about that is just regarding the false history we're given. So probably one of the most controversial passages of the Quran is when God tells the messenger to tell the people to refer to the Tawrat and the Injil. And the Christians, they take this and they manipulate. They're like, oh, you see, it's telling you to refer to the Bible, and the Bible contradicts the Quran. But here's the problem with that. So firstly, my argument to these people is, let's just say Muhammad was making this religion up, right? Okay, he made this up, and he knows he has no basis, and the Bible existed before the Quran, and this is what the Quran is talking about, the Bible, the Old and New Testament. Okay, he's making this religion up. Why in the world would he tell people to refer to a book which he knows is going to debunk his platform? Clearly, there's something wrong with the history we're told. The Tawrat and the Injil, just the fact that Muhammad is told to tell them to refer to that, it seems to suggest that they had different books and texts back in the Quranic time for them to refer to. Do you understand what I'm saying?
We don't even know. Okay, because some people will say the Torah is the law, just the law, and it's the law in the Quran, and the Quran is just referring to itself, right? There are people that will say that. Same thing with, even David Ewing Jr., you know what he claims? He told me, he's like, well, because there's all these Quran manuscripts in America and these old colleges that people are saying are Tartaria buildings that we couldn't have built. So he's trying to say that there was 5 Qurans, and one of them was called the Torah, one of them was called the Injil, one of them was called the Zabur, and one of something else, right? And they compiled all those together to make this one Quran that we have now, and that's what he claims. Do I agree with that? I cannot speak to that, but as I said in my video, there's no way the Injil is the Gospels, because if the Injil is a book at all, then Jesus had it in his hands,
it
right?
Was it was given to him, and isn't it conspicuous? So if you're going to try to say the Injil is the Gospels that we have today, why is there no mention of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter? None of these people exist in the Quran.
Yeah, and they're telling you to commit shirk. So it doesn't. Okay, if it's confirming the Injil, And then Gilles is like, well, Jesus is God. And also like, it's not consistent, by the way. It says all kinds of different stuff, as you know, but there are at least parts where that gospel is saying, Jesus is God. Jesus is the only way to heaven. The Quran it's condemning that so hard, so repetitively. There's no way. You know what I mean? Anyway, the history. This is the thing about the history that David Ewing Jr. is going to point out, because there is extremely strong evidence. Listen, okay, maybe people don't know this, right? I'll go through a couple of the key points that stuck with me throughout the years. Number one, the majority, I'm talking 80+% of the world's Islamic coinage, that is not just Arabic, but it has Islamic, like the Shahada on the back. 80% of that money is found in Northern Europe in Viking territory, right?
Wow.
Now they're going to tell you that the Vikings were drunk pagans and that they basically just went around, kidnapping people, kidnapping their neighbors. And like somehow these people just had such good trades with, like, I don't know, wherever these coins are supposed to come from. They're not even supposed to come from Arabia. They're supposed to come from Uzbekistan or something like that. They had such good relations with these people that they traded so many slaves that they ended up with 80% of their silver that they mined. It's impossible, right? First of all.
Such cope, man.
But this is the thing, right? Not a lot of people know this. The natives here, they remember Vikings coming here. They don't describe them like the way that, you know what I'm saying? They don't describe them like drunk pagans. They say they were like
dreadlocks and a big beard.
I don't know, because you know what? I made a video on this. If this world order existed, number one, there was all kinds of races. It wasn't just white people or black people, because this is the other thing too. All this evidence about an Arabic-speaking Muslim people in America, they're going to try to tell us that they say this. They say that they're all Moors from North Africa. No way. But neither were they all blonde Vikings. Neither were they all, I don't know, Turks, right? So it was a world order. It probably wasn't that different from what we have now. People traded. They had technology. We don't even know. But basically, if there was a conflict, we don't, this is the thing. We don't actually know what happened, right? There was either a big war, either they had a war with the humanists, the Luciferians, the Vatican, whatever, that toppled them, or they were done away with by God, or both. We don't even know. All we know is,
you read the Quran. If we read the Quran, to my audience out there, you see God talks about constant resets. God, civilization rises up, they wax proud, God destroys them, then a new one comes in. And God specifically says to us in the Quran that the people in the past, they tilled the earth more than we did. Are your atheists better than those? God says the people of the past were greater. And this is what I was telling Brother Monty as well in a private call. I believe this is what Satan does all the time. Whenever a civilization rises up out of the ashes of a previously destroyed civilization, Satan convinces them that they're the greatest, they're the strongest, they're smarter than everybody else. This is the first time we've ever had a world empire. We're great. And then God destroys them for their pride. Then a new one rises up, and then Satan, weaker than the last one, and Satan convinces them they're great, and God destroys them. And then we just cycle through.
You said it. That's what it looks like. For real. I couldn't have put it much better than that.
We've been here.
But yeah, okay. So these people, my point is, it's tempting. What I've come to realize recently by talking to people like David, because I think David Ewing Jr. is from one of the families that used to control the world, and they don't have control anymore, and they're like sad. And they actually, believe it or not, I mean, he's basically told me, you guys, he's told me that Sunnism, they created Sunnism, and that they're trying to get Sunnism to take over the world again. That's what they're trying to do. But because they can't do it without hadith and all this other stuff. They need imams. They need a system of rule that makes it possible for them to tell you what to do.
They need to gatekeep the Quran.
Yeah, that's what they did back in the day. I think, but then again, here's a question: when was it that people started memorizing this Quran? Right? We have no idea.
We have no idea how old it is. Really, it goes back to the beginning. Adam.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Because, okay, now, at some point, we know that there was this thing called the Inquisitions. This is another David point that he's right about. Okay, I'll just summarize it real quick. Jesus couldn't have been anything but a Muslim because, think about this, the Jews of the world, let's just say, according to official history even, several hundred years ago, where were all of the Jews? Do you know? Where would 90% of the world's Jews be, let's say, 600 years ago?
They would say scattered on the face of the earth.
Well, they'd be lying. Well, yes. But 90% of the world's Jews were in Spain. Not only that, every one of these people was speaking Arabic. All of them. All their books were in Arabic. They didn't have a Hebrew language. Okay? So now we have to remember. Okay, now, by the way, for your audience, I'm a quarter Sephardic. So Sephardic is a Jew from Spain.
Oh, don't say that. They're going to say I'm a shill now. I'm inviting a Jew, a Yahud.
Well, I'm not an Ashkenazi, I'll tell you that. But you know what I mean? Like, let's say these are my ancestors I'm about to talk about. Some of my ancestors. So these people were speaking Arabic, and they had the Quran. They did not. No, Hebrew did not exist. Okay, and furthermore, if Isa, let's say Isa fits into the timeline that we're given, right? Okay, but then you have to look at the flamenco research. What somebody like David Ewing Jr. is going to end up kind of putting in your head is the idea that 1,000 years have been added to the history. If that's true, then Isa would have been walking the earth this, and again, I don't even want to endorse this because I actually have no concrete knowledge, but it would mean, if that is true, that Isa would have been walking the earth 1,000 years ago, not 2,000 years ago, which I don't know. But if he was, where would he be? He's sent to the children of Israel. Where were the children of Israel? They weren't in modern day Israel. There's nobody there. David's going to show you this in his videos. If you look at the 1800s photographs of Jerusalem, it's just like a little mining town. There's like nobody there. There's more people like where I live than there were there at that time. And this is supposed to be a place where millions and millions of people live. And it's supposed to be
another criticism of the modern history is that, so when we read the Quran, we get the idea that Makkah, wherever it is in the world, it was the mother of cities. It was the button, the navel of the earth. Abraham was commanded by God to declare the pilgrimage for all mankind. This was a place of high traffic where many, many, many people could come. Yet what's bizarre about the Mecca we have today, so-called Mecca in the Middle East, is it was basically empty until recently, and actually it wasn't even built to accommodate as many people as are coming there today. Now we have millions of Sunni converts all over the world. They had to break down the walls and rebuild the thing because they never expected this many people to come to this place. But the original house of worship, it was for all of mankind. So there's a problem with what at least the Quran says and the historicity we're given with Mecca.
Yeah, I mean, but also there's a history with there's a problem with the biblical history of Jerusalem, right? Now, again, I can kind of get behind this idea that the Bible is actually about the history of Middle Ages Europe. That I can kind of see, but the Quran is not. So,
but speaking of a different history altogether, like another thing that's conspicuous is you don't see any of like the major things that we're told are the most influential. None of them are mentioned. No Indus Valley civilization, none of these empires, Aztec, Mayan, none of this stuff is mentioned in the Quran. Ethnic groups that we think of.
some of these things, what it really is, in my opinion. Okay, I mean, David will show you. He'll show you the fakery that's involved with ancient Egypt. He'll show you that there's photographs. We have photographs of, like, for example, the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. That, like, if you look at the first photographs of it, it's literally just a tiny little mine for marble. And then they built this thing there. You can see it being built. And they're like beating the fuck out of these people to get them to build this thing. And that's where Egyptian history comes from. It's on the walls, right? Somebody put it there. It was the Polish, right? Actually, it was basically the European empires. But Egypt, okay, Pharaoh. We know that there was at least one Pharaoh, and his, again, it's like you said, looking at what the Quran is saying, Pharaoh was not like some little dude that, like, oh, I just have like some guy over in the Nile Delta, and like I just am whipping these Jews and making them fucking build my pyramids, right? No, it was a huge. He might have ruled the whole world for a time, or at least the huge part of it.
Well, think about it this way. If these were just these like Bronze Age people with cloths on their head and sandals and, you know, these Bronze Age tools, he literally commanded Haman. He said, Haman, kindle thou for me the clay and build me a tower so that I can go into heaven and look to the God of Musa, though I think him a liar. Can you imagine how much technology you would need to have to actually think it feasible to build a tower that goes all the way to heaven? We can't even do that now.
Yeah, well, that's where, like I said, Egypt, Babel. That's where the Tower of Babel. That's the origin of that myth. It actually comes from the Quran, right? So, right. But what they've done, what it looks to me like they've done, is they have just made embellishments on everything. It's like, oh, we have a vague, because it's not even that the story in the Quran is vague. It's talking about something like, God is so good, like he has given us. It's like, on one hand, you have guidance to live by. Then on the other hand, you have history. And then you have secrets in the Quran. The Quran is actually full of secrets. But these secrets, they have gone to, I mean, if you think about it, right? If any of what we're talking about is true, the conspiracy involves the entire world. Just like the flat or the globe Earth conspiracy. The whole well, and that's part of it. That's part of it, right? Like, clearly, if you take the Quran seriously, the Earth is not a ball flying through space. Like, there's no way, right? So, and then on top of that, it brings a question up, like, how, are there more continents we don't know about? You know what I mean? There's so many things you could ask yourself just based off of looking at the Quran as authentic and not as like, oh, this is just, this is what they want. They just want you to be like, oh, this is like outdated. It's archaic. This has to do with. God is just speaking poetically. That's what they want you to think. And when even the Quran is making fun of poets, it's like, oh yeah, look at these guys, they're losers. One thing I wanted to say was, so like at that time you got introduced to the Quran, then one of your band members brought to you Tartaria, Mudflood, then you got into David Ewing Jr. What did that do to, because like I'm running a little bit out of time, but like how did that deepen your relationship with the Quran in your testimony? Well, again, I already had this notion like, hey, this is the real history. Then it's like, here's all this evidence. And, I went through a phase of listening to people like Dr. Hani, who I do not endorse anymore. But he's just some guy trying to reevaluate the Quran and stuff like that. But it deepened my relationship a lot because now this is just my backstory that gets me to the point. Maybe we can do another video another time. But basically, I've seen a lot of things in my life that prove to me that this Quran is the word of God, and there's no doubt about it for me. But the way it's set up, I mean, God is so wise. God is like, to say that God is wise is just like such an immense understatement. Yeah. We are, this is the thing, right? We are just now barely scratching the surface of what this book is trying to tell us, right, and what it's been trying to tell us this whole time. So yeah, it deepened but then what deepened it more is the fact that even David Ewing Jr., all of a sudden everybody's turning against this Quran, right? Even him, he starts out because he's trying to get people like me, and they're trying to, by the way, they're trying to get they're trying to get, there will be in the next few years, you're going to see this. There's going to be a white nationalist type of Islam that's going to show up in the next couple of years. And so just be prepared for that. This is one thing that they're trying to do by saying, because all the stuff I told you about, the Vikings and the coins and all this stuff, they're going to, this is what David is laying the foundation for right now, is he's going to basically say that it's the inheritance, just the same way the Sunnis are doing, right? But they're going to switch it and say, no, this is the inheritance of us Aryans, so because there is some truth in that. Do what?
They're going to LARP it.
Yeah, but the fact is, there actually is some truth to that. But they're going to. That's not the message. The message of the Quran is not white nationalism. You know what I mean?
It's for all of it.
So that it's a guidance for humanity. It's not just. It doesn't say this book is a guidance for Bani Israel. This book is a guidance for the Muslims. This book is a guidance for and it says humanity. So. Yeah, that's the gist of it right there. But yeah, and everybody watching, be cautious. Everything you do in this world is, obviously, if this Quran is telling you the truth, which it is, everything you do matters. Everything you say matters. Everything you think matters.
Yeah.
The way you even look at the world, like literally, this is like the flat earth thing. How do we know that the world doesn't turn around when you think of it that way? Well, we know as God told us it is set up like this. It's stationary. The sky is rotating around a place, and that place is probably really special.
If you think, like for example, if there are people out there who think, oh, it's not important how I view the world and what the shape of the earth is and what our history is, well, the people who run the world, they're really concerned with what you think about the shape of the earth and your history. They want you to think a certain way.
They're super invested into it. I mean, like you gotta imagine that. There's so many tangents I could go off about this, but it's like, you really have to think about, when did all this space, look, people can look this up. When did the idea of space become popularized? When did space travel become popularized? It was right after Project Paperclip, right?
Operation Paperclip, yeah.
And it's not just that, like everything is connected. The nuclear bomb is part of this. Obviously, if you're flat earth pilled, I hope your nukes are fake pilled. Yeah,
they're fake.
They're totally fake.
The only person that has the ability to level entire cities is God.
That's right. But you know what? I think there might be something coming up that they're preparing for, and when it happens, they might want to be able to take credit for it, because, as you said, the Quran is telling us. The Quran is telling us over and over and over. Hey, look how many people were done away with because they were wrongdoers. Yeah.
And they're gonna say it's one of their own weapons or something like that. They like to take credit for acts of God.
Because they're looking at this Tartaria stuff, they're saying there was some kind of destruction. It looks like a directed energy weapon. Who had this technology? The angels. Yeah. The angels are the only people, capable. I mean, it's God's command, but I'm saying he's got angels that do whatever he tells them, and they don't question anything, and they're going to have
angelic death ray.
Yeah, the literal, or I guess they did a video thinking it has something to do with the Tariq. I don't know, but basically that's the short story of how I came to follow the Quran.
That's pretty interesting, brother. I obviously, I don't want to share too much about this, obviously, because you're a little uncomfortable, but I just want to let some people know that he has some very, very, and he's shown me proof of this. He's visited a certain place that was the hot topic of debate and discussion a couple of years ago, and this has furthered his engagement with the Quran, his deepening of the Quran, where he's encountered jinns and supernatural phenomenon there. And obviously
that's just one story, dude.
Yeah.
Like, me and you have just started talking, dude. If I told you every story that I have that deals with the unseen and just jinns, just specifically jinns, That'd be a whole other several-hour conversation. Maybe we'll have time for that, Lord willing.
Lord willing. Yeah, he visited, I guess, a certain man who allegedly committed suicide and ran this horrible ring. He visited a certain part of his place and saw some terrifying stuff. He sent me photos of it, too. I got the photos. He showed me the.
Yeah, there are probably people who have leaked that somewhere on the internet. I hope not, but anyway, and maybe that'll be something that can come out publicly one day. I just don't want to get in trouble because some of this stuff's illegal, man.
Yeah.
And some of it's just pure fantasy.
Crazy, man. Crazy.
I'm just kidding. It's not. I wish it was fantasy, but
no, you would think.
But yeah, thank you for interviewing me, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. You have an interesting story, and I'm, God willing, maybe we can get into further topics of history and Quranic history, and maybe because I know this is something I have to dive into. I still have to go further into David Ewing Jr., some of his good stuff at least, and I know you have a lot of knowledge on that, so you can kind of distill down and get rid of all the fluff.
I would just say, if you're watching this, and for you, Brother Walid, as well, a good place to start is just that video that it's titled, Where is Jerusalem? You just need to keep it in mind, like I said, and I said this even before I knew what his agenda was, because I just knew something was wrong with this thing. I just was like, he's got an agenda. I don't know what it is yet. I know what it is now. It's to get you to throw the Quran away, basically. But the earlier videos, where is Jerusalem? Did Jesus speak Arabic? Those kind of things. Those are full of good information. The ones about did ancient Egypt exist? That's a good one too. It's not just ancient Egypt. It's ancient Greece. It's ancient India. All this stuff is a lot more recent than they're telling us. And these were real civilizations. But they're lying about so many details that it's really hard to take any of it seriously.
Well, God says in the Quran that they dress truth with falsehood, the unbelievers.
Oh yeah,
that's what they do. So I guess.
But it also says, we throw the truth against the falsehood and it shatters.
Yeah.
So Lord willing that we can do that ourselves here as well.
God willing. So I guess the summary of your story is that you've drank of the wells of many religions and faiths all around the world, but then when you encountered the Quran, it spoke to something within your soul, and it also intrigued you with the history it spoke of, and that deepened your engagement with it. That's really, I guess, the essence of your story.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even go into all of it, but basically, let's just take my word for it, guys. I've studied everything. I even used to read the Necronomicon, all that stupid stuff. I have checked out everything. The Quran is the only thing that has any value, like, in the entire world. Even this history stuff is just secondary. It's just kind of like, hey, here's a proof for you. By the way, this is just for the believers. God shows us these signs for a reason. You know what I mean? So why I think it's important to bring up this history stuff is because right now, as you've noticed, there are a lot of people attacking Islamic history, and how can you not? It's full of holes, right? So there are people, I witness these happening all the time, people losing their faith, losing their iman, losing their religion because of these holes, and just being like, maybe I should just be a Christian, maybe I should just be an atheist because, obviously this can't be real. And so that's why I do think that it's our duty, my duty at least, to, just point out these holes in history, because people need to realize, like, the Quran is telling the truth. It's not, it doesn't have any holes in it whatsoever.
Trust it on everything. You can take that word literally, the Quran.
It's literally I don't know, like, basically, there's no question about that this comes from God. You know what I mean? Whether it came through an angel or whatever, it was Jibril, whatever, it is on the command of God that we have this scripture.
The Quran is like we're taught a lot of lies, especially. I mean, we are given lies today. Just a couple of years ago, they told you that there was this, so-called virus going around the world, killing people left and right. They lie about this in our lifetime. So you don't.
Yeah, they lied about Jeffrey Epstein killing himself.
Yeah, that guy, exactly. They lied about so many things. They lied about the shape of the earth. This is in our lifetime. They lied about this September attacks, the whole
safe and effective.
Yeah,
they lied about that, obviously. Hopefully everybody knows that by now.
Yeah, so
You never know.
you don't think that they can't lie about ancient history? They're lying about today's history, let alone ancient history. And the Quran is really our antidote. It's the only authentic contact we have with that ancient past, which has been hidden, our ancestors, the true nature of the past. And the Quran is going to be our key for uplifting all of these lies and getting the truth out.
And like you said, it's the Christians that built the world, which they didn't, but the Christians that built our society, they were following the Quran. They weren't even Christians. That's something that people should look into for themselves if they really care. But you know what? Christianity didn't build the world. It's not even old. The Bible is not, there's no question at all, just for the viewers. Look at the Quran next time you read it. Say, look at it like it's the oldest thing we have.
Yeah.
And it'll hit different.
With that secret ancient past.
And it's got the guidance is so good, but it's just like if God is going to guide you, then you're not ever going to have to worry about where you're going. You know what I'm saying? That's my final thing. So I'm still in the process of being guided, and Lord willing, there'll be a lot more cool things to talk about in the future. But my life changed. That's all I can say. I definitely will tell you that my life. To say that my life changed when I started following the Quran is like the biggest understatement ever. My life changed in ways you couldn't believe. I'm in the middle of COVID. I'm homeless. It's like I have a wife. I have land. I have a house. I have wealth. God provided for me in such a way, because it's not that God. There's a difference. People need to understand. There's a difference between being tested and being punished.
Yep, God tells
and I've been through both.
Tell us about that in the Quran. There's a difference.
I've been through both. I've been through phases of being punished for my ignorance and for saying things, for committing shirk, basically. I've been totally been punished for that.
Yeah.
And I've also been tested. But, God delights in us doing well, really. I believe that. I believe that God actually delights in us succeeding. And so hopefully there'll be a lot more success to come. And hopefully for everybody watching as well.
God willing, brother. Well, may God bless you, and thank you for the beautiful testimony. And Lord willing, we'll do this again in the future sometime soon.
All right, man. And have a good day. Everybody else watching, God bless you.
God bless you. Peace be upon you.
All right, man.
Peace and blessings in the name of the Most High, viewer. My name is Walid Naeem, and I am a zealous submitter to the one true God, the creator of all mankind. Do you notice something wrong with the world? Something strange? Despite us having a church, synagogue, and mosque in every neighborhood, how has this entire Western civilization fallen into abject atheism, nihilism, and savagery? Why does life just seem so dull, so meaningless, and so devoid of anything real in the Occidental world? Despite the ubiquitous presence of these religious institutions, why are our so-called Muslim sons in large numbers drinking, smoking, partying, and chasing after women, with no seeming desire to do anything more with their life other than satisfy their base pleasures, when God has commanded them to be clean, righteous, and responsible leaders of their community? And why are our hijabi so-called Muslim daughters walking around with tight jeans that reveal their figure, with TikTok accounts posting semi-provocative, self-absorbed videos of themselves online for the world to see, when God has commanded them to lengthen their garments and be modest in their mannerisms? What has happened here? These young men and women are supposed to be making themselves right before God while raising the next generation of ardent defenders of the holy faith. But it seems that Islam features no more in their lives other than a scarf on their head, a Friday fidgeting around in the mosque when their parents forced them to go against their will, or a decorative hanger in their car. At this rate, if God allows us to continue going down the road it is, then Islam and the Quran will become pretty much non-existent in the lives of most of our descendants, if it wasn't already non-existent now. If we do not take a stand soon, in a few generations, our children's children will likely be indistinguishable from the secular West. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? Our kids to live in? A world practically devoid of the remembrance of the one God and all things sane? I obviously can't speak for you, but for my own self, I can personally say, count me out of it. I'm not going to sit here and just watch my brothers and sisters, those who claim to believe in God alone, believe in Judgment Day, His prophets and angels, and all the other aspects of this holy creed, get duped into going to hell. I'm not going to let this happen without at least something of an effort on my end to reroute this dark trajectory. So, again, how in the world do we end up here? There is a mosque in practically every neighborhood in the West, and no shortage of donations that get dropped in their boxes. They have had lots of funding, lots of time, and unquestioning support from their respective congregations, yet somehow have been run over by the secular atheist. All of their so-called Muslim children go to the atheist, secular public schools for most of their week to be taught beliefs that are completely incompatible with the Quran. And we wonder why they have ended up the way they are. If these houses, and by these houses I mean the mosques, were truly of God, that were doing everything right, then why would our Lord let them get so decisively trampled upon by their enemies? Why do the wicked have all of the reins of power here? Clearly, something is not adding up. Well, it is my thesis here today that the vast, vast majority of mosques that exist in this world today have lost their way and follow a religion which is completely foreign to the Quran. This is why they have failed so miserably in the West, and it seems that God has forgotten them. In truth, the real reason behind their shortcoming is that they, and many of us, have forgotten God Himself, which is why He has left us here collecting our bitter receipts. So, what are my exact criticisms of the mosques today? As a Muslim and a man committed to the truth above all else, what are my personal gripes with their institution, which claims to be for God? The first glaring problem I can think of is that the majority of people who call themselves Muslim have allied themselves with a body of literature that is foreign to the Word of God, treating it equal to, and in fact above, the Quran itself. Of course, I am talking about the Hadith. Listen, the facts are this. There is no justification within the Quran which tells us to follow this Hadith stuff, which came hundreds of years after the Prophet Muhammad died, and therefore he could have had no ability to oversee what people have said about him and determine if it is true or false. It is now becoming crystal clear, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, that many things that have been ascribed to him in their most quote-unquote authoritative texts, which they call their Sahih Hadiths, are forgeries that directly contradict God's final revelation. To take these words of men, i.e. the Hadith, and hold them to be equally authoritative to the words of God would be breaking the first and most important commandment, which is to worship God alone, making no equals with Him. To say that these supposed words of Muhammad, which are not even Muhammad's own words, but simply very doubtful rumors about what people who existed hundreds of years after him say he said, that have been decided upon by the scholars as authoritative, holds equal, or in fact any weight in our faith comparable to the verbatim words of God Himself, the Holy Quran, is idolatry. You are exalting man's words to the status of divinity, which should only be given to God's words. Nothing comes even close to the Quran, because God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is its author. This includes the Hadith too, which pales in comparison and is superfluous to the glorious Quran. If you are interested in seeing a full refutation of the Hadith, you may watch my video titled A Defense of Prophet Muhammad, David Wood and Hadith Exposed, which is linked below. In it, along with refuting and putting in his place the worst opponent of Islam on the internet, Mr. David Wood, I also expose how the Hadith is completely contradictory to the Quran and the source of much of the Muslim world's problems. It is a 2-hour-long documentary where I seek to demonstrate the true character of Muhammad in the Quran, defending his history and personality with primary source quotations. I clear the last prophet of God's name from the people who have tarnished his reputation the most, which are certain types of Christians, and, sad to say, Hadith-following Muslims, which have said many terrible things about him. No, Muhammad was not a money-hungry, tyrannical warlord who married a 6-year-old girl. He was a shy, humble, meek man who married adult women, had compassion for even his worst enemies, and oftentimes had a tough time even standing up for himself out of fear of hurting other people's feelings. This is all demonstrated in detail in my video. Once again, the link for that will be in the description under the tab, The True Character of Muhammad in the Quran. So that is the first problem with the mosques, the reason for which I feel they have been forsaken by God, their adoption of an apostate literature which contradicts their foundational scripture. The second point of contention I have with many of the mosques is their seeming unwillingness to say anything controversial which may make them face persecution from their government. The fact that 9/11 was not only an inside job, but the fact that no planes hit the Twin Towers on that day, and the whole charade was a hoax designed by the governments of the world to forever frame the Muslim people as terrorists and justify invasions in our countries, should be taught to every man, woman, and child. This great fraud of the September attacks has left such a lasting, enduring reputation on every brown person and Muslim in general that it should be discussed in every mosque. Our people are not responsible for that crime, but it was the governments of the world who carried out that plot and framed us for it. 9/11 is just only one small example, though. There are many, many other quote-unquote conspiracy theories, which are really just conspiracy facts, avoided by the mosques due to their controversy, like the fact that the monetary system in the West is an ungodly scam based on usury, the fact that the so-called healthcare system is a predatory empire which doesn't try to cure anybody, but instead makes money off of human suffering, the fact that sodomite propaganda is being promoted to the masses, including our children, and the fact that the thing which I will call the C-19er, to avoid censorship, was a hoax perpetrated by the powers that be to greatly expand their police state, censorship incentives, and surveillance systems worldwide in order to create their new world order, and much more. These governments that have occupied our lands are de facto terrorist regimes, and the mosques seem to say nothing of it. They appear to be more concerned with not being labeled extremists while they live their comfortable, well-funded lives, avoiding topics that are hard to deal with due to the abject persecution they bring. That is my second problem with them. They're at the very least lack of awareness, or if not, perhaps lack of willingness to address the real geopolitical situation going on in the world. And lastly, my third trouble with the mainstream mosques, which can also be put into the category of conspiracy facts, is their complete ignorance on the true nature of the earth. It may sound as a shock to you, my viewer, that the Quran, the Bible, and in fact all of the ancient scriptures teach the earth is flat and stationary. This is the only model of the world which is compatible with those texts and also scientifically provable. This flat earth conspiracy, which should really be called the globe earth conspiracy, is one of the biggest lies of the modern world, we are told, and goes in line with what I said earlier about the endemic corruption of the governments of the world. Everything you have been told about where you live is a fabrication, and the space agencies are a shameless hoax. For a fully detailed presentation on the subject of flat earth, where I demonstrate the science, the history, the philosophy, the verses in the Bible and Quran proving it, and much more, you can read my book titled The Flat Earth Manifesto, which is linked in the description. This work runs to nearly 1,200 pages and is practically a textbook on not only the topic of flat earth, but the subject of physics proper, and I expose the biggest fraudulent religion of the West, which is science worship, otherwise known as scientism. As with all of my work, it too is available for free. No, you do not live on a pathetic speck of dust spinning around in the middle of nowhere in space. You live in a brilliant, intelligently designed terrarium created by God and are at the center of the universe. Again, to learn more, the link to the Flat Earth Manifesto will be in the description. Those right there are my three biggest scores against the mosques of today. There are more points I could bring up, but these are the major ones. These are the controversies which have estranged me from the rest of the so-called Muslim world. Believe me when I say that I would love to join them, and that it hurts me so deeply that I have to pit myself up against the very institution I was born and raised in, the mosques I attended from childhood, whose carpets upon which I walked, stood, prayed, and listened to the preaching in my earliest years. But that is the price to pay for the truth. My commitment to God and what is right is more important than my emotional attachments to a place that was once dear to my heart. Simply put, this is why I think God has forsaken us. This is why I think that the mosques have been steamrolled by the secular atheist. It is because most of us have abandoned the word of God, neglected preaching the truth, and instead chosen comfort over courageous action. That is my thesis to why this great falling away in the West has taken place. If this sounds shocking to you, if it sounds so unbelievable that the majority of the so-called Muslim world could be deceived so badly, then I simply have these verses in the Quran to show you. In the name of God, the Almighty and the Merciful. Chapter 6, verse 116. And if thou obey most of those upon the earth, they will lead thee astray from the path of God. They follow only assumption, and they are only guessing. Chapter 25, verse 30. And the messenger will say, O my Lord, My people took this Quran as a thing abandoned. God has really predicted this a millennia ago. He knew that the people who follow what is really right are few and far between, that the majority of men and women are led astray, and the people who claim to love Muhammad the most, i.e., mainstream Muslims, would abandon the glorious Quran. God has revealed to us 1,000 years ago that this all would be the case. It is my mission, therefore, by the will of God, to band together with like-minded believers who have understood the truth and work together to build a new institution from the ground up, founded upon prudent fear. We need to start fresh, start anew. We need to build a new mosque where people can hear the unfiltered preaching from the Quran alone, where men and women can get married, where children can play and be educated in the truth, and where the name of the Most High God, without any associate partners, can be remembered. We need a group of highly dedicated men who will raise and defend this institution with their own hands if need be, and go out into the world warning people of the punishment of God, bearing witness to the truth of his oneness. That is my mission, my viewer. If you found that this mission of mine has touched your heart and is something you want to get involved with, then feel free to contact me in the email below. I am located in Ontario, Canada, and I'm looking forward to form a community with like-minded believers who want to contribute to this great cause. I am neither a nationalist nor racially biased. If you follow the Quran alone and believe in the truth, then as far as I'm concerned, you are my brother in the faith. I prefer you over someone of my own kindred who denies God and commits corruption in the earth. My loyalties are primarily ideological, not racial. Remember, my viewer, that this life is short. Everything we do and don't do is recorded by God and will either bear witness for us or against us on the day of judgment. Hell is eternal, and I do not know about you, but as for me, I want to meet my Creator in the best state possible. I want to spend my life struggling to build up my people, the true Muslims, so that God may be pleased with me on that day. If you are interested in that, then feel free to join me. If not, then find something else good to do which will prepare you for your appointment with the Most High. That is where we are all going anyway. With that being said, I say peace and God bless to all of you good people. Take care, everyone.